Let's talk about something incredibly complex, maybe one of the most complex things there is, human personality. We're going to create a kind of map to help navigate it, specifically looking at how clinicians make sense of the patterns that define personality disorders. Our goal? To turn a really complex subject into a clear, understandable guide.
So, you gotta wonder, right? When these personality patterns become so persistent that they cause real distress, how in the world do mental health professionals even begin to organize and understand them? I mean, it seems like an impossible task, but believe it or not, there is a system.
And the answer lies in this book, the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The best way to think of it is as the official blueprint for mental health. It's the map that gives us a shared language and the entire structure for our conversation today, making sure clinicians everywhere are quite literally on the same page.
So, here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with that high-level map. Look at the 3 main regions. Then we'll dive into each one to see what's there. And finally, we'll talk about why having this map is so important in the first place.
Okay, let's get into the core framework. The entire system is actually built on a pretty simple structure, and if you can grasp this, the whole picture starts to make a lot more sense.
It all boils down to the number 3. You see, the DSM takes the 10 primary personality disorders and organizes them into 3 distinct groups, or clusters. And just by doing that, a really complex system suddenly becomes so much easier to navigate and understand.
And here it is, our high-level map. The 3 clusters are all organized by their main themes. You've got Cluster A, the odd or eccentric group where social withdrawal is a really common thread. Then there's Cluster B, the dramatic and emotional group, defined by major struggles with impulse control. And finally, Cluster C, the anxious or fearful group, which is driven by high levels of anxiety. So let's break each one down, starting with A.
All right, let's zoom in on the first part of our map, Cluster A. The name itself, the odd and eccentric group, gives you a pretty solid clue about the core characteristics that tie everything in this section together. So the unifying theme for this whole cluster is a very distinct way of relating to the social world. The central feature you see across these disorders is a pattern of thinking that often comes across as distant, maybe a little suspicious, or just plain unusual.
So specifically, Cluster A is home to 3 disorders. First, there's paranoid personality disorder, which is defined by a really deep-seated distrust of other people. Then you have schizoid personality disorder, which is all about a profound detachment from social relationships, a real preference for being alone. And finally, there's schizotypal, which involves more eccentric behavior and ways of thinking that can feel almost magical, creating a lot of discomfort in close relationships.
So, to sum up Cluster A, think social withdrawal and unusual ways of thinking. Now, get ready for a total 180, because we're about to pivot to a completely different emotional landscape. We are leaving the detached world of Cluster A and jumping headfirst into the intense, dramatic world of Cluster B.
Welcome to Cluster B. If Cluster A was all about social distance, Cluster B is defined by emotional intensity. This is a completely different part of our personality map.
This statement really just hits the nail on the head. The absolute central struggle for individuals with these personality patterns revolves around managing incredibly powerful emotions and acting on impulse. It's all about volatility and intensity.
Now, this cluster is a bit bigger, with 4 distinct disorders. We have antisocial, which is marked by a real disregard for other people's rights. Then there's borderline, with its intense fears of abandonment and huge emotional instability. Next is histrionic, which is characterized by a powerful need for attention. And finally, narcissistic, defined by a deep need for admiration and a real lack of empathy. They're all unique for sure, but they all share that core theme of emotional dysregulation.
And now for our final stop on the map, Cluster C. We're making another major shift here. We're moving away from the outward drama we saw in Cluster B and into a world that is dominated by inward anxiety.
The main driving force behind all the behaviors in this cluster is this powerful sense of apprehension. The patterns we see are often just strategies to avoid perceived threats, or criticism, or abandonment, and it all stems from a really deep-seated fear.
This final cluster is made up of 3 disorders. First up, avoidant personality disorder, where fear of rejection is so strong it leads people to avoid social situations altogether. Next is dependent personality disorder, marked by a deep, pervasive need to be taken care of. And finally,
obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. And hey, this is different from OCD. It's defined by a very rigid preoccupation with orderliness, perfection, and control.
So we've toured the entire map, but you might be wondering, what's the point of all these categories? Why does organizing personality this way actually matter? Well, it's all about moving from confusion to clarity.
When you boil it all down, this cluster system does three absolutely vital things. First, it creates a shared language so that all the professionals can communicate effectively. Second, it organizes just immense complexity, helping us see the patterns by grouping similar disorders together. And third, it guides our understanding, giving us a valuable starting point for treatment and for research.
But you know, at the end of the day, this system isn't about fitting people into rigid boxes. It's a tool for understanding. So I'll leave you with this thought to chew on. Knowing that this map exists, what does this framework, this whole attempt to organize the patterns of human experience, truly teach us about ourselves?